back on the channel today. It's with Guerrilla Filmmaking. Side note, this is the coolest basketball I just got from my son. He absolutely loves it. But this is a non-destructive workflow. It's really good working with pre-comps, and it organizes things and it kind of keeps the complexity down a level, because sometimes when you're doing these kind of edits and you have all these mats and effects and stuff going on, it just gets very complicated and it's hard to keep track of what's going on. So like I said, I'm going to show you guys my workflow and let's get straight into this right now. All right, so the first thing I do is I set up my base comp, and there's two things that are most important that I do in here. That's the 3D tracking and the normalizing of it. The reason this is important is normalizing is so you don't have things jumping all over the place, and you also have the position data ready to put the assets in a place where it actually looks like it's realistic inside the scene and it's moving accordingly with what's happening in that segment. So just keep that in mind. And the second thing is creating a mat. And if I put the eyeball tool in and solo this, how I typically do this is put a tint effect on to make it black and white and use a levels effect to crush the blacks, and then to put the whites as high as I can. And sometimes I can make this more white, but the reason I just did it this way is because I wanted it to look like it was more gradual and to fade in with some of the clouds in the background. That just adds some more dimension and makes your stuff look more immersive when you're doing it. So once you have this mat created, that's pretty much the base to how I actually get this whole edit set up. And then I start duplicating it after, depending on what assets I'm putting inside the scene. So like I said, the next thing you do is head into your project window, and I already have these all duplicated from this base, but I would typically duplicate this and then I'd rename it whatever I want it to be. So the sky comp, the tornado comp, the blending comp, or whatever it is. And then I'd start actually building the comps for the final edit that I have in mind. All right, so heading into the sky comp, you guys can already see that everything is tracked and put in the place it needs to be. So all I really did here was bring in the asset that I wanted, which was this sky layer over here, turned it into a 3D layer, used some of the position data from one of these solids. And then after that, I used this matte layer we had over here as a luma matte and said, I only want this sky to appear in the lightest pixels inside the scene. That's how I set up the sky comp. And from there, again, what I did was I duplicated this base layer one more time, and then that's how I made this tornado inside of this comp. And as you guys can see over here, if I take off the soloed layers, what's happening here is I brought this tornado in, 3D tracked the scene again, and then use that same matte layer as the matte to put it behind. And if I were to take off this, if I were to unmat this right now, you guys can see the tornadoes tracked into the scene, but it looks weird because it's in front. And all you have to do, like I said, is go here and then make that a matte for this matte layer, and then not an alpha matte, but a luma matte. And that's what's going to put it behind and then kind of bleed it into the background of the image to make it look a little better. And then if you really want to just get rid of this base footage, because this is pretty much just reference for what I'm doing, just solo this tornado effect, and then that's going to leave the matte still here, so that when we bring the pre-comps in, you have nothing but the tornado obscured by the background that we're using as a matte. And that's a good little trick. Solo those layers before you bring it into the next comp that we're going to do to blend everything together. And the final one is the blending layer, and this is where I kind of put everything together. And as you guys can see, this kind of looks like a lot's going on, but it's actually very simple what I'm doing, and I'll show you how I got here. So if I were to duplicate this base comp to make this blending comp again, if I go back to the base over here, as you can see is I have these two different comps here, and this is for the sky and the tornado. So what I did is if I take this comp here and I drag and drop it into the base comp, you can see already that the sky is perfectly put in the background. And this is because we created the mats previously, and it's easier for us to just drop these pre-comps in than to have this big mess with all of this stuff going on that we don't need. And if I take this tornado comp and I put it in here, as you can see, if I put it on top of the sky comp, it's going to be in front of it. And then this is exactly how I set up the comp to make everything come together. From there, it's really just coloring and playing around with a lot of things, but I'll show you exactly a few different other tricks that I use to make this look a lot better. So for instance, you guys can see inside of this clip, we have a lot of lightning going off, and you can see the reflections in the water. And the way that I did that was I actually made this sky comp here, and if I soloed this over here, as you guys can see, this is pretty much just the sky comp, and then I put a deep glow on it and a fast box blur, and this is to spread out the pixels to use it as a reference for what's going to glow into the water. And because I only wanted in this water matte the water area over here to be really affected by what was happening inside this image once the lightning went off to reflect inside the water, is I opened up Mocha over here, And then I actually just made a mask tracking this area over here. And once I was done that, I just went back into the main. I created AE mask. And then from here, as you guys can see, I just added a feather and expansion to it. And then I used this as the mat for that sky over here so that when the lightning was going off, you guys can see right over here, if you look, it's reflecting inside of the water. And that's what kind of adds more realism inside your image. And if you increase the mask expansion, you'll actually get the glow affecting other areas inside the image too. So that's how I created the mat to relight this image. That's just a little trick for you guys. I hope that helps if you guys are trying to put together how I actually made that look the way you wanted it to. And then for the lightning, I did the same thing. I used this sky as a mat for the lightning just to blend it in a bit more so it didn't look like it was just kind of standing out in the open, and lightning would typically move through clouds before it got to the bottom. So this is a good way to obscure the lightning layers to make it look like it's a lot more realistic inside of the comp. Now, what I also did is I created a depth mat. And the reason I did this was because I wanted to create or simulate what looked like more fog and have a smoother roll off into the distance. Because if I turn this off right now, you're going to see everything looks too crunchy and contrasty. And I just did not like that look. So what I did was I used the depth scanner too. And if you guys want to see exactly what this is doing, is it actually creates a depth map in between all of these. And then I use the levels effect to crush the shadows and the highlights to make a fall off happen in between it. And this is what gives that image kind of like that look of fog or depth going into the distance. And I actually inverted it because I didn't like that the whites were kind of at the front instead. And that's to create more fall off in the background. So that's just another tip on how I created this. And then what I also did is I changed its blending mode to screen. And that was just to make sure that it lightened it up a little more. And as you can see, it makes a big difference if you turn it on and off. And that's what created that fall off into the distance, because I wanted it to look like it was a more foggy, kind of misty environment. So that's a little trick that you guys can use there too. Then the last thing that I really did was add some snow to the foreground over here to make it look like when the camera was moving, it was actually pushing forward into the snow. And that asset I got from AE Juice over here, and it was inside of the snowstorm effects. And there's a whole bunch of effects. Highly suggest this plugin that you guys could use for your stuff too. But I found something that I thought worked for the scene really well, and then I brought it in, and I thought that complemented what I was trying to do here. So, and then from there, it was pretty much just me adding magic bullet looks, levels, a curves effect to crush some of it, give some contrast, some noise inside of the image. And then in the final comp over here, I actually added a vignette to it, a letterbox on top, and then I started adding glows and different things just to blend it together a bit more. But yeah, that's literally how I put together this whole comp. And the reason this is really good is because once you create one pre-comp and then you just duplicate it a bunch of times, at least you're organized enough to know what those mats are and how it's working, as opposed to having like 1,000 clips in one sequence and you get lost and you don't know what's what or where it is or what mat's affecting what part of the image. And that is just a giant headache. So using this workflow is a lot more organized and a lot more beneficial, and it's actually not as time consuming when you're trying to sift through stuff, trying to find what's what and where is where, right? So that's just how I created this clip. I will leave a link to the project file down below. I'll try and put some stuff down there so that you guys can follow along or try it out yourself. But if you guys have any questions, remember to join the Discord, hit me up on Instagram if you guys need anything. And yeah, you guys, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.